I have a dream that my four little children
Darkness
one day live
cannot
in a
put out darkness.
right.
will be trying
We
to
have
do
a
right.
moral obligation
Only
to
light
disobey
can do
unjust
that.
laws.
I have a dream today.
Love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. That is just awesome. MLK at his finest. Truer words have never been spoken.
I don't know, but an eye for an eye leaves everybody blind.
Anytime I whined to my mom about something, she'd always say it's better than a stick in the eye. And that's what I think Dr. King is talking about here. Stick in eye violence. It's a concern, especially in the inner city, the outer city, all the cities, because there are so many sticks and eyes.
Capitalism was built on the exploitation and suffering of black slaves. And continues to thrive on the exploitation of the poor, both black and white, both here and abroad.
Oh, just dive right in. Personally, I'm just not sold on the whole anti-capitalism thing. People don't get exploited anymore. It doesn't happen. I've actually talked to my boss about this very thing. Which one of you has my cell phone? I'm on call right now, and I just need to check it real quick. Just need to.
The problems of racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.
Whoa, that sounds a lot like redistribution of wealth, which I am not down with. Nobody's taking my money and giving it to some woman on welfare with 9 kids from 9 different men, paying for a suite at the Hilton with her welfare checks, and selling TVs on the side that she's been buying with her welfare discount. I've seen it on the internet. Half off, all TVs for people on welfare. That is a thing. That is a thing! That's not a thing. If it is, sign me up. I love me some TVs. I'll go on welfare tomorrow for some TVs.
Many white Americans of goodwill have never connected bigotry with economic exploitation. They have deplored prejudice but tolerated or ignored economic injustice.
And my head hurts. Can we maybe get back to a quote about love? I call it a love line. I'd like to use my love line, Alex. Or is it Drew? Who's the host of Wheel of Fortune?
I've also decided to stick with love, but I know that love is ultimately the only answer to mankind's problems.
Oh, thank God. There he is. There's my little Martin Jr.
It's all right to tell a man to lift himself by his own bootstraps, but it is a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps.
Everyone has boots. Everyone is born with boots. The quality of the boot, though, that's the catch. Some of us were born with designer boots, Versace, stilettos, black leather, pointed lace-ups with 4 gold buckles up the front. And then some of us were born with other boots. But we're all born with boots. We all are. That's a fact. That is not a fact. Some of us are born with Crocs.
We must rapidly begin to shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society.
I see what you did there. That's classic boot baiting, making it seem like I'm thing-oriented. But that's like only with boots, okay? This quote, though, I actually really like it. I read it the other day on Facebook on my new iPhone 12, which if you haven't seen it, it's fantastic. I'll give you a tutorial later. I am so lonely.
So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream.
What was that dream?
That all men are created walking with brothers, sisters, arms in arm through the valley of the shadow of death. I take a look at my life and realize there's nothing left because I've been blasting and laughing so long that even my mama thinks my mind is lost. Yeah. What does it even mean? What is blasting? I wrote the scripts for these two videos after reading one MLK quote. It's in the first video, where he says he's almost concluded that the white moderate, not the white supremacist, is the great obstacle when black folks strive toward justice. Why? Because too many white moderates care more about not justice, but order, staying in your lane, not disrupting their lives or making them feel uncomfortable. The quote landed when I first read it, soon after black NFL players were shamed for peacefully protesting police brutality and racial injustice. And it's still spot on. Ma'Khia Bryant, Andrew Brown Jr., Adam Toledo, Anthony Alvarez, and Ronald Green were recently added to the massive list of people of color killed by police. It's been a year since Floyd's murder, and many expected the rate of police killings to drop. It hasn't, so more protests will come, and with them, a fresh round of criticisms from white people. Floyd's murder caused the biggest civil rights protests in U.S. history, but I was disappointed by some of my white friends' comments. Why don't they protest when cops kill white people? Rioting isn't the answer. Even Joe Biden said violent protest, which is rare and blown way out of proportion, is un-American. Really? Do you know anything about the lead up to the Revolutionary War? You know, the thing that kind of started the U.S.? Biden also said that the form of protest should never overshadow the cause, but that's it. Nearly every form of racial protest, even peacefully kneeling at games through the anthem when people are on their asses at home, overshadows the cause because white people always say, you shouldn't do it that way because of blah, blah, blah. We silence the players, letting a chorus of bullshit build, they hate the troops. We silence those who peacefully block traffic. But people are trying to get to work, as if being on time is worth more than lives. And we're surprised by violence and protest, and we immediately jump to condemn it? Why do we give a fuck that buildings burn down? Seriously, why? If it might lead to fewer deaths by police, then let's set the sky ablaze. A human life is worth a hell of a lot more than a fucking building. Oh, it's just a shame some insurance company's gonna have to pay to rebuild it. And for those thinking people who work there are now jobless, that's sad, but human beings are good at surviving. You know who can't? The countless dead at the hands of racist police violence. And if you don't think it's racist, did you know the birth and development of the modern day police force were slave patrols in the South and night watches in the North? One was designed to control minorities and the other one did it too. It's right there in the very fabric, the foundation of every police and sheriff's department, racism. This explains why black people are stopped by police more than white people and are significantly more likely to be searched and killed by police. It explains why they're arrested and convicted at a higher rate and more likely to experience lengthy prison sentences. It explains why a former NYPD officer said, "I got tired of hunting black and Hispanic people because of arrest quotas." It explains why an arrest form the Baltimore PD used had a blank spot for the arrestee's name, but race and sex were already filled in, black, male. With all of this and way more, we should understand the violence and shouldn't be surprised by it. We should expect it every fucking day. People of color have cause to do so. The fact it doesn't happen more shows a level of restraint that should be exalted. Now, I don't want to make it seem like people of color were the only people committing violence in the protests. That's just false. White people were as well. And the guy who, in my opinion, is the key violent protester, the guy who set it off, he's white. I'll get to him in a bit. But, and this may surprise you, protests containing violence last year were rare. The Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, or ACLED, found that between May 24th and August 22nd, there were 10,600 protests. Only 5.3% of them had some protesters engaging in violence. And that includes violence and anti-COVID lockdown protests, because yes, some of those protesters got violent too. And it being so rare is good. If it were more common, it would get trapped in the news cycles and cause an historical throwback. In the 60s and 70s that led to the war on drugs, Nixon's plan to incarcerate protesters, and subsequent tough on crime leaders really fucked shit up. Check out the new Jim Crow and 13th for more. More violence now would again scare white people into electing more law and order candidates. It would beat the war on crime drum, aka the war on poor, mostly black people. But I actually struggled with whether or not the violence in the Floyd protests was good. MLK preached nonviolence. I'm obviously a big fan, but I honestly haven't bought in completely. On one hand, I believe good came from it. It shocked the world and led to a long, hard look at racial injustice and police killings. The long look, the issue stayed in the news cycles. The hard look, watching the 9-minute and 29-second murder of a human being, a man, a father, pleading for air.
I can breathe.
For his mother.
Mama!
Was he flawed? Yes. But who among us isn't? That long, hard look has and is leading to good change. Police reform legislation has been written and some is now law. White people are learning and talking about racial injustice more than ever. It was one of the biggest issues for voters in the 2020 election. Buildings, streets, neighborhoods, parks, etc., named after racists were renamed and statues of them came down. Brands, bands, and sporting teams dropped their racist parts. Even Rhode Islanders voted to remove and Providence plantations from their state's name, a measure that failed 78% to 22% in 2010. Oh, and Officer Derek Chauvin got convicted, which I don't think white people understand how insanely rare that is. But with every action, there's a reaction. While all that progress is good, I have this terrible feeling that the reaction to the violence is opposite, but not equal. I feel that those racial justice ripples will be met by a wave of injustice that will affect not only minorities, but our democracy at large. The more you step back from the 2020 election, the more awful you see. And you can't ignore the strong possibility that the violence, again rare and overblown, factored into over 74 million people voting for Trump. Conservative media ran the violence on loop. Trump stoked racial tensions, urged governors to, quote, dominate protesters, and dubbed himself the law and order candidate. And Trump supporters were more likely to list crime and safety as issues important to them. You might feel good when you see that Biden won by over 7 million votes, but a simple majority is meaningless. We let the Electoral College give the minority a strong chance to rule the majority. If Trump got another 11,800 votes in Georgia, 10,500 in Arizona, and 20,700 in Wisconsin, Biden doesn't reach the 270 electoral vote threshold. So Biden won the Electoral College by less than 43,000 votes. Think of that. If 43,000 fans piled into the smallest NFL stadium, it wouldn't even be 2/3 full. I know that Trump's insanely high voter turnout can't be attributed solely to the violence in the Floyd protests, but it played a role. Hell, I know a 90-year-old who went out and bought a gun because Fox News focused so much on the violence that he thought Black Lives Matter was going to invade his neighborhood. Conservatives love violence in protests. 8 journalists go to Black Lives Matter events to film it, selectively edit, and funnel it up to right-wing media to smear the movement. The major instigator in the Minneapolis protests, which spread throughout the country and world, was Umbrella Man, who spray-painted free shit for everyone on an AutoZone, then broke its windows. It worked. Others looted the store and it lit on fire. Sergeant Erica Christensen, a Minneapolis PD arson investigator, wrote in an affidavit, "This was the first fire that set off a string of fires and looting throughout the precinct and the rest of the city." She wrote that the protests were relatively peaceful before he did this. It created an atmosphere of hostility, and his aim was to incite violence. Turns out Umbrella Man is a white supremacist who is trying to turn America against the cause. It may have, to a certain degree, worked. Trump claimed widespread voter fraud after a rigged election, and Republicans are jumping to pass voter suppression laws. 14 states have enacted 22 laws making it harder to vote, and restrictive voting bills have advanced in 18 state legislatures but haven't passed through both chambers. Here's what all that awful looks like combined. The striped states have pending legislation and have enacted voter suppression laws. Who are the primary targets of those? It ain't white people, which is why they're so popular in the South. Georgia Republicans passed such a law because it's unacceptable that 2 Democrats won their Senate seats and Biden won the state, again by less than 11,800 votes. That bill could be the difference in their U.S. Senate and House elections in 2022 and Biden's re-election bid in 2024. What else? Redistricting and gerrymandering will now give Republicans several more House seats in 2022, eating away at the Democrats' slim majority and possibly overcoming it. Mississippi Republican leaders and judges recently struck down the voters' decision to legalize medical marijuana. The Republican legislature in Arizona passed a law to strip power from the state's top election official, a Democrat elected by voters, giving it to a Republican. Republicans in Missouri have decided to flat out ignore a measure passed by voters to expand Medicaid. And Republican candidates who tried to overturn the election are now running to be the secretaries of state in Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, and Georgia. If they win, they'll be the top election officials there, prepared to hand the Republican candidate those states on a platter. And if Republicans win the U.S. House and Senate in 2024, they can just refuse to certify the election if Biden wins, and then the House chooses the president. Republicans have shown their true colors. They are the racist, anti-democracy party, no exaggeration. So here are my takeaways. Though it was shocking, kept racial injustice in the news, and led to some good, the violence may have contributed to more harm than good, as it may help Republicans disenfranchise people of color and steal elections from us all, the minority ruling the majority. But we can keep the good going with activism, peaceful protest, and electing the right people, and by listening, learning, and embracing the tension required for justice. My main takeaway? This guy knows his shit. But how do you feel about the protests, the aftermath, or police brutality? Or what's your favorite MLK quote and why? Everyone who drops an answer below, and repeat answers are welcome, will be entered to win these Urban Intellectuals Black History Flashcards Volume 1 and 2. They're awesome and cost me $250, so definitely enter. And please help my show. Like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. What does it even mean? What is blasting?